So welcome to today's session, which Rob already mentioned is Git Integration and Azure DevOps for Power BI. A little about me. My name is Akshata Revankar, and I'm a data engineer or a data architect at McKinsey. And I have been in the data engineering and BI space for close to 15 years. I started off as a full stack developer, but then narrowed down into data engineering because that's what I enjoyed doing. And spent a really long time at Humana as part of the enterprise main report development team, where I built the data engineering pipelines and also led report development on different tools and platforms like ClickView, and then BI Publisher, OBI, and I forget, and very recently Tableau as well, and majorly have worked on Power BI. Okay. Um, and the best way to reach me is either LinkedIn or on Twitter. I do want to thank everyone for joining for the session today. Okay, so the agenda for today will be that we'll look at a Fabric workspace. I mean, now it's no longer Power BI, it's all Fabric. So it's a Fabric workspace and how it integrates with Git. So we'll look at the Git integration component on a Fabric workspace. Then use Azure DevOps, which integrates with Power BI deployment pipelines. And deployment pipelines help us do the deploy part of a CI/CD pipeline. So Git integration, Azure DevOps, Power BI deployment pipelines. We'll walk through each of these components, and we will wrap up with a demo session, watching all of this integration functioning. Okay. So for a quick introduction, the Git integration fabric, which is a feature that was recently released, I would say mid of 2023, wherein along with PBIX and PBIT, another extension that was introduced was PBIP, or which is the Power BI project file. What this lets us do is it converts the Power BI file, which previously was such a huge issue, and not just Power BI, I mean, even all the other ClickView or other tools that I have worked with, they have their own file extension, which is like a compressed file, which is hard to perform a CI/CD with, like, even compare files or compare versions. So with PBIP extension, what Microsoft has introduced is it presents the whole composition of a Power BI file in a simple text format, wherein you can review changes, you can do code development, because now that you can review changes, you can perform merge on your files. You can get a very good kind of source control. Previously, we used to just upload that whole binary file or the compressed file as the whole size as is into a version control. And maintaining versions was like it used to get really bulky. So this has really simplified all that aspect. And with the Git integration now, Power BI Workspace very seamlessly integrates with Git repos or like Azure DevOps repos, so which is like Git integration. It very seamlessly syncs with that. We'll look at that in the demo. And you can look at the status of each file, how whether it's synced or like it has uncommitted changes. We can look at that status on Power BI service. So what I have on the right-hand side is a picture of the DevOps lifecycle. So the Git integration helps us accomplish the build and the code part of the DevOps lifecycle. Moving on to Power BI deployment pipelines. The deployment pipelines is something that has been for a while. I would say more than two or 3 years now. And what this lets us do is, with few clicks, we can move our code from dev to test and test to prod. But with today's demo, we'll create the deployment pipeline, but won't really click there to move our code. We will be using the Azure DevOps pipeline to have it automated. And just like the PBIP, where you can compare your content, deployment pipeline was introduced to help you do CI/CD. So even within deployment pipelines, we can do some level of comparison, but not like what we can do with PBIP, very simple text file comparison. But there is some level of comparison of content. We'll look at that as well. You can pick and choose what to migrate. This is something we won't be doing today because we are trying to automate the whole flow, but I can show you where we'll be able to pick and choose and migrate our content. And also we can change data source rules. So let's say your test report connects to test database and the production connects to production database. We can set rules or parameters, and which are called as rules in Power BI service, wherein it will automatically switch to the connection once your report is pushed to the next environment. We will look at that as well during the demo. Okay. And coming to the Azure DevOps. So this will be the third component that we'll look at in today's demo is Azure DevOps release pipelines. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention is the Power BI deployment pipelines help us accomplish the deploy part of the lifecycle. So we have got build, code, and deploy. So coming to the last part of Azure DevOps release pipelines. What I have used for my demo today is the Power BI automation tool extension, because when you're building Azure DevOps release pipelines, you need tasks, right? Each of those tasks based on what tech stack you're working with. So Power BI automation tools gives us the extension. It's available in the marketplace. Helps Azure pipeline, Azure DevOps pipeline talk to Power BI. So it has those pre-created tasks which you can just pull into your DevOps pipeline flow and then configure it. And so it has very specific Power BI deployment tasks. We'll look at that, and it helps us automate the whole process. And this helps us take care of the release phase of the CI/CD pipeline. So before we get started, some of the must-haves for to implement this whole flow is either you're a Power BI Pro user in a premium capacity, or you have a premium per user license, like because deployment pipeline is a premium feature. I haven't really looked at the Git integration, whether it's a premium feature or not, but I know deployment pipelines is. You have to be the admin for the Power BI workspace for deployment pipelines. And this is because you have to be able to override the content, because your deployment pipeline is trying to override the content. And for this, you don't have to be the user yourself. And that is what we'll accomplish with security groups and app registration. We'll create a service principal or an app, Azure app, which will be part of a security group. And this security group will really take care. So it doesn't have to be a person's ID. It can be a service principal. So whether somebody leaves the organization, then nothing breaks. And lastly, Azure DevOps. In my case, it's less than 5 users, so I have a free version. Probably organizations have an enterprise version, which should help accomplish that. Okay, with that, we are ready for the demo. So we'll look at the Git integration feature, quick review of deployment pipelines, and then build. So what I already have prepared over here is a very simple Power BI report. So let me show where I have it saved. So I have a folder called Presentation SQL Saturday, and within that, I have a PBIX created. And that is what I already have up and open over here, which is says financial summary. And this is a very simple PBIX file. And this connects to an Excel, which is saved in a OneDrive. So let me go to transform data and show that. Sorry, it's open on the other window. Okay. Okay. So this is a simple Excel file which is saved in OneDrive. And what I have done on OneDrive is, I had planned to have everything open. I just missed the OneDrive folder. Oh, wow. Okay. Never mind. I will not change my credentials over here, mainly because I have set it up with a different account. So if I were to show the URL, okay. So I have set up a parameter which points to 3 different files. So I have the exact same file copied over in 3 different folders called dev, QA, and prod. And the only thing different between those files is a particular amount. So if I go back here in the data, what I have is my manufacturing price. Manufacturing price is 100 in dev. And if I switch the parameter to be QA, then it will become 200. So it's this column, manufacturing price. And if I go to prod, it will be 300. So that's the only difference, but it's 3 Excels saved in OneDrive, 3 different folders. Okay, let me close this. Okay. So what we are going to do is I'm going to save this file in the new format that I mentioned. And if you don't see this particular file extension to be saved, let's see, file, when I do save as, over here, it also gives me the option PBIX, PBIP, PBIT. And if you don't see PBIP, that is something you can turn it on in the preview features. Okay, preview features. Yeah, over here, Power BI project file, PBIP save option. If you turn it on, you should see the PBIP file option. It is still a preview feature, but then it's available. So let's go ahead and save this file as PBIP. And I'm going to browse this device. I want to save it in a particular folder so that you can see, because if I save it in the same location, it'll get a little cluttered and we won't be able to see what exactly it's getting breakdown as. So currently, when we work with Power BI file, we save it as a simple one PBIX file. But switching it to PBIP here, I've gone into SQL Saturday. I have a folder called demo, which is currently empty over here. So I'm going to save it as PBIP in this folder. So let me come back over here and I say save it as PBIP. Okay, so let's go to our folder and take a look. Okay, so now it has split it into two folders: financial summary data set, financial summary report. There's a Git Ignore file, and we have the PBIP. Instead of going through the structure over here, we're going to open it in Visual Studio. So let me folder. I'm going to go to documents. So we saved it in the demo folder. So I'm just going to select that folder and say select folder, which will show the whole breakdown. Okay, so over here, okay, so we have the folder file dot data set and dot report, and we have the PBIP. So I'll first click the PBIP and show. So this is really a very lightweight, simple file which just shows that the path for the report is financial summary dot report. So let's open the report. There are several files, but the only one that we need to worry about is the report.json. And the reason I say that is because when you make any changes, this is the file where we'll see all the changes, where you'll be able to compare and look at what has exactly changed with the report. We will look at that in a bit. And same way in the dataset folder, this model.bim file is where any Power Query editor changes that we do will be shown over here. And something else to check over here is, let me see. In the .pbi file, there is a file called cache.abf. It doesn't open over here. And the reason I wanted to show this file is mainly because this is what actually saves the data. And they have put that under the ignore, git ignore. So when you push your file to either like GitHub or Azure DevOps, it won't be pushing the data itself. It will push the whole structure, but not the data itself. So when I open the dataset folder and show you, rest all files are very light. If you see, they're very, very small, but the cache.abf is what saves the actual data content. So that is something that doesn't get checked into your repository in Azure DevOps. So once your date report is published, we have to run the refresh so that it can bring the data with it. Okay, or refresh the data. So far what we have looked at is we took a Power BI file, a regular PBIX file, we saved it as PBIP, which broke it down into a folder structure, which we looked at it in Visual Studio. So the next step is we have to check in this code, or like, put this code in a repository. So for that, I'm going to go to Azure DevOps and first establish a project. I'm going to create a new project wherein I can push my code. So I start with a new, let's call this PBI demo. I'm just going to do everything else. I just leave it as is, create a project. Okay, so I'm projecting here and my repo is going to be here. So right now there is no code. I'm going to go in and copy this path so that I can check in or map my code or check in my code to this repository. And for that, I come in here, I initialize my repository and then give it a remote. I add a remote here. I'm just going to call it mint. Okay, so now we are ready to I'm going to just check in the base version. So I'm going to first stage the changes and then say base version and commit and push my changes. So right now there is no remote branch. I'm just going to say to use the main branch, or if I had chosen to name it differently, I can do that as well. So I say, okay. Okay, so that activity is done. I'll come back to Azure DevOps, refresh. So now I see my base version has been made available over here. Okay, so now we're going to look at it. What if I make changes, right? So let me come to my Power BI file and let's say, first we'll make a change on the visual side and see which file gets affected. So let me just put a pie chart, select sales and probably country. Okay, so it has created a pie chart. I'm going to go ahead and just click save. And let's go to Visual Studio. That should have picked up the change, right? So if I go back to the folder structure, I had mentioned that the report.json gets impacted by what we do on the visual side. So let's go and look at what the changes are. It shows that I have added a new pie chart. Oops. So let's see. So this config was one visual and this second config is the pie chart that we added. So if I scroll, let's see, I'm at some place it does show what kind of chart it is. If I don't get it quickly, we'll move on. Okay, at some place it will show, but the idea is that so with every visual change, report.json is what will change. So now we'll go back to the report and make a change at the data level or at the Power Query editor level. So I'm going to go to transform data. Okay, and let's say I don't need my discount field. So I'm just going to say remove and say close and apply. Apply changes. Okay, so I'm going to save this file. Okay, that should have been saved. Let's come back over here and see that should have picked it up. Yes, so my model.bim is updated and it shows that the discount part of the code has been dropped. So what we saw so far is we saved PBIX as a PBIP. We saw the structure in Visual Studio Code, and then we checked in our code into Azure DevOps repo. We made some changes. We noticed, we checked which files really get impact, which are the ones where you see the changes and where you can merge changes. So I'm going to go ahead and stage these changes and give a comment. See. Okay, I'm going to say commit and push. Let that finish. Okay, so that's done. We'll come back to my repository, refresh this. And now we see that updated data and visual changes have been added over here. Okay. Okay. So now that my code is here, how do I get it over to Power BI? Normally, I would have gone and clicked this publish, but today that's not the way we're going to do it. It has to be automated. So as a Power BI developer, all I do is complete my code changes, test it on my desktop, and then push it to the repo. Now the repo is going to take care of publishing it to the Power BI server or Power BI service. So for that, we are going to use the Git integration feature of a Power BI workspace. This is something that was introduced like about, I would say, 9 months ago, right? This came with along with Fabric. So what I've set up over here is 3 workspaces. These are all premium workspaces, 1 development, 2 test, and 3 production. So ideally, our code would migrate from development to test to production. Okay, so I come to my development workspace, come to workspace settings. So over here, we have a new feature called Git integration. Okay, so in my case, I had already done the DevOps setup. But even if like you're trying to do it for the first time, I found this step to be pretty simple. I didn't really spend a lot of time because my Power BI service and my Azure DevOps are under the same user, or if you may say same tenant. So it very quickly found that like, there is a DevOps account associated. So it picked it up. So in my case, my DevOps organization is this. My project, if you see, we had several, but the one that we just created was a PBI demo. We just created this. So I have to make sure to select that name. We're going to select PBI demo. The repository is PBI demo and the branch is main. Once I do the connect and sync, this is just a one-time activity. We don't have to repeat it. I've generally not seen it go this low. Okay. So yeah, our report is now available. So what it checks in is not the broken down structure. This looks exactly same as it used to before. The semantic model or the data set and the report are present over here. So let's say what if I make one more change and push it to my repo? I want to quickly show you what it looks like over here. So let's say I close this graph and add another graph, another table. Okay, I'm going to save this. Let's look at. Okay, so it has identified that one change. Stage my changes and then commit and push. Okay, so now so far the changes have gone to my Azure DevOps repo. So let's look at the repository. Oh, it was this one, sorry. I'm going to refresh it over here. And yeah, we added the table, so this is visible over here. And now when I click the source control, so it's trying to compare and it shows that there has been a change on the report side. So if I change the semantic model, even that would show up. I can go ahead and say update all. So it will bring in and sync the changes again, right? So my changes are only syncing with dev. I didn't do a manual publish. I'm just pushing it to the Git repository and the repository comes here. I can compare that if anyone has pushed any new changes, quickly select those changes and then push it in and bring it up to up to the latest version that is there in the branch. Okay, so after this, we looked at this. Okay, so far with this, what we have achieved is we have achieved version control, right? I mean, I have a version maintained in my repository. And so my build and code phase is I would say, CI part of the CI/CD pipeline is done, like wherein I can develop the code on my desktop, push it to a repository, and the repository syncs with the Git workspace. Now we need to set up the CD part, which is the deployment part. And for that, we are going to start with the deployment pipeline. Deployment pipeline is which is already available as a feature in Power BI or a Fabric workspace. This is something, for today's demo, I'll be creating a deployment pipeline manually, and then we'll be linking it to Azure DevOps. But Azure DevOps, the Power BI automation market extension that we installed. So let me show you. This is the Power BI automation tool that I was talking about. When I installed this extension to work with Azure DevOps, it has several tasks, and we'll look at that when I get to the pipeline stage, wherein we don't even need to create a deployment pipeline manually. And it can also create a pipeline for you, delete the pipeline for you. So if you were to do a clean deployment every single time, it can create everything. So today, to speed up, like I'm just going to create the pipeline manually. So let's call this PBI demo. And then next. So when it was first introduced, these stages were very hard coded. It was always called development, test, and production. But now we have a feature wherein we can add more environments and can give custom names. I'm going to leave it as is. Okay. So now there are 3 stages because that's all we left at. And here it will let me choose a workspace. One thing to remember is in a deployment pipeline, one stage can be mapped only to one workspace. So let's say once I select a development workspace over here, if I create a second deployment pipeline, I will not be able to choose. If I were to show you, like in my list of workspaces, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 premium workspaces, but I do not see the other 3 because they are part of a different deployment pipeline. And only these 3 are visible because they have not been used in any deployment pipeline. So let's go and select development, test. I mean, we won't be doing the deployment all the way to production. We'll just see it from development to test. But yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and assign a workspace. So assign and assign. Okay. So over here, this all comes 0 because we don't have these artifacts. So there is one semantic model and there is one report. So when I show this, it shows these 2 reports. And over here, there is nothing. So right now, if you see that since this is not in sync, it shows this color. And then over here, the environments are in sync. I can choose to compare.
Akshata, can I ask you real quick if
Sure.
you zoomed your web browser slightly, would we still be able to see all the content?
Yes.
Oh, that's better. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for interrupting. Okay. Okay, so over here we can compare and see what has changed, and this shows the difference. So based on this, you can also come in here. So this is the pick and choose part. I said I can pick and choose what I want to migrate. So let's see what I want to push to the next environment. And let's say if I had multiple reports in this particular workspace, I can use this pick and choose. But this is a manual way of doing the deployment pipeline, but it still gives the option. But today we won't be doing a manual deploy, which is by clicking this button. We'll be using the Azure DevOps pipeline. So far, our PBIX to PBIP, and then pushing it to the Git repository, syncing it with Power BI Workspace, we created a deployment pipeline, which will help us move the code. So the next thing is to, sorry, I'm just keep checking my notes to make sure I'm going in the right flow and I don't go back and forth. Okay, so now we are next ready for Azure DevOps to set up the, if I may say, to set up the deployment pipeline, and that will be done in this space. So, but before I go into that, one part to understand over here is Power BI and Azure DevOps are like 2 different services or 2 different products from Microsoft. And even for these two products to talk, we need an identity in between. And that is the part I was mentioning where we need an Azure app and a service principal. And so Power BI can be used through Fabric APIs, right? Like there are service principals that can um, service principal as in it's an identity, so it's not a person. So instead of using me as a person doing all this, we are giving us a service account, if I may say. So a service principal can use Fabric APIs. So all these deployment pipelines, create workspace, everything, we also have REST APIs for that. So in our case, we will be using these Fabric APIs or Power BI APIs to create workspace or create a deployment pipeline or deploy content. And in order to allow that to be done, this is a tenant setting that needs to be enabled. The service principal can use a Fabric API. And here I've put a security group. If I come to my Azure portal, let's look at Microsoft Entra ID. At any point, if the Zoom doesn't look fine, just let me know. The Zoom it install on my laptop has been giving me issues, so that's why I'm not using it today. Uh, okay, so I'll come here to the groups. And I've set up a security group called Power BI DevOps security group. I mean, this is the name. And if I click this, I will see that the members is a service principal, which is a, let's see if I click on it, let me go. Yes, it will bring me to the Azure app, right? So this is my app, which I also, let me go this way. So this is not showing all the details properly. So if I come to app registrations, so I have my app created over here. So once you create the app, you'll have to set up the secrets over here as well. We'll be using this one today. Okay, and we'll need all this information. So I'm going to leave this window open. So this is the service principal identity, or this is the Azure app, which is a service principal, which is part of a security group. And I have let the security group have permissions to call the REST APIs or the Fabric or Power BI REST APIs. I've given it permissions. And the reason we need that is because from Azure DevOps, those APIs will be called to perform all the deployment actions. So I'm going to come back to my repository over here. And one change that we need to do is I have to add that service principal to my project to say that that particular service principal has permissions to do the deployment. So here in project settings, I come to service connections, create a new service connection, Power BI. So I'm using a service principal, leave this in. I have to add a service principal ID. And what that is it's a client ID, right? So let me come back over here. And so my client ID, this is what it says, application client ID. I'm going to copy this. Come to settings, put my client ID, service principal key. This is the secret key that was created over here, the value, not so I need the value. I have that saved in a notepad because when you create it the first time, after that, it is not visible anymore. So I have the value saved. Tenant ID is again on the overview tab. This is my tenant ID. To copy this, bring it over. I just give it a name. Okay. And I'm going to give it grant permissions to run all the pipelines in this particular project. I save it. There is another way to create the service connection, and I'll tell you a reason why I didn't go through that one. So I come back to my pipeline. So this was my repo. I have my code here. Now we're going to set up a pipeline that is going to talk to deployment pipelines. And we are going to create our first pipeline. Okay, I'm going to use the classic editor. So over here, since there is only one project, one repository, everything is automatically selected. I don't have to make any change. I'm just going to continue. I'm going to start with an empty job. Okay, so over here, so this is default. Let me put my age. Sorry, I have already set this up. I have this, and let me show. So over here first, let's fill it. Okay. So over here, these tasks are visible now because I have already installed the Power BI automation tool. So down it gives you an option of Power BI automation tools, which it says it's already installed. And since I did this, I'm able to see all this task.
Could you
So
zoom that a little bit for us?
yes, sure.
Thank you. Oh, yes, thanks.
Okay, so these tasks, like I can delete a deployment pipeline, I can create a new one, assign a workspace. So everything that I did manually over here in the deployment pipeline, like wherein I assigned a workspace, I created a deployment pipeline, all those steps can be done through task. And to show you, like I had set this up pipeline, like when I tested the first time, I tested it with all these steps and it works just fine. But for today, I'll be just doing the deploy content to test stage so that we can do the demo more quickly. So my agent is set up. I'm going to say deploy my content to the pipeline. Okay, and let's go and start. So this is the place where I mentioned that I can come here and create a connection to, but the reason I didn't go this way is because when I click new over here, if you see, it doesn't tell me exactly what a service principal ID is, what a key is. And when the first time I was trying this flow, I struggled with this part a lot. Like, then when I looked at some, because when I just started with this particular space and I kept thinking, what is this? What is tenant ID and key? But when I looked up some documentation, I found out that that's the other flow to do and where it gives the exact details. So here there is not even an information icon with which you can try and understand what this is. So since my connection is already set up, I can select that. My pipeline name, I can take it from here. Sorry, this is the place I would take it from here. And either I can just hard code it over here, or there's an option to put a variable. We can do it variable also, or we can just paste it over here. The target stage in our cases, we are going from development to test. So it just knows it is the next level. And deployment node, we can just say test. Okay. And we are planning to deploy all artifacts. We do not want to create a new workspace. And beyond that, all the other settings we can just leave as is. So at this point, I'm going to save it because there's one step. Okay. One step that I haven't done is my workspaces, right? All the workspaces over here. If I show the manage access, I'm the only user. And as I'd mentioned on the slides, the service principal or the security group that we create has to be part of this workspace. They have to have admin access so that they can deploy content. And also they have to have access to the deployment pipelines, right? This deployment pipeline, I have to add that service principal as a user so that they can call the REST API. I mean, they can call this pipeline, they can call each stage, and they can override the workspaces. So first set change I'm going to do is come here, manage access. So I'm going to add this security group as an admin. In case of a deployment pipeline, you just add users as admin. The workspace permissions is what takes care of whether they can just view it or overwrite it and things like that. So I'm going to add this person over here or the service principal, come to my workspaces, add them as okay. Okay, so far we added the service principal to the deployment pipelines, dev workspace, and test workspace. Now I come back to the pipeline, and this should be it. We should be able to run the, I'm just checking. Yeah. I think let's queue it and see what it does. So this is the default agent pool main. Let's run it. Okay. This step is what I've generally struggled the most with, because those access permissions, it creates a lot of issues. So I had to like do it a couple of times to see what permission is working, what is not, and I had to go back and forth. Yeah, and this particular step where I would get the most errors, mainly because I would be missing some or the other permission. Yes, that failed again. So let's see. Requested name or ID was not found. So there is some permission. I mean, this doesn't mean the pipe, the name is correct. And this is where I used to even get confused. Like the name is fine, I copied it right. What is the issue? And it is generally that particular service principal is not able to see that deployment pipeline, and that's where it gives an issue. So one thing, so instead of security group, let me see if it helps if I add the Azure app itself. Let me add them here in the workspaces too. Okay, so let's try one more time. Yeah, no matter how many times I run this pipeline, it somehow I always get stuck at this deploy due to some access issues. And because there are so many other parts like the workspace access, pipeline access. Okay, so it went a little further. Okay, so that completed. Let's go to the test space and refresh it. Okay, so my code got deployed over here. And the part that I was talking about, like if you have to change your data source connection, this is just a one-time setting, which, so now this one will show in sync, right? Because we have we can come at this part, and then it recognizes that in the semantic model, there is, oh, you're not an owner. So I have to again come and change myself as the owner. Go to the workspace, because this user is different from the service principal. That's why it gives those. Settings, so I have to take it over. Either I can come here and change the data credentials, edit these credentials to point to the QA file. This is one place. But if I set it up in the deployment pipelines, every time the code is deployed, it will take care of it to point it to the newer connection. So let's see if it lets me do this time. Yeah. So I had set it up as a parameter. Let's see. Yeah. And if I say add rule, it will automatically identify that I had set it up. And in this place, I can come and put the other OneDrive file path that I have, which so for the demo, I had saved them all in a file. Like I know which one is there, which is test. I can point it. And oops. Save it. But after doing this, I do have to do another refresh because it doesn't pick up the report with the newer connection. So let me just, yeah, like I said, I can either deploy from here as well. Let's quickly just try to deploy this. I can add a node. Okay, let me run a data refresh. Let's go to the development workspace and look what the amount is over here. It should be 100 in okay, so my manufacturing price is 100 in my development workspace. So let's go to test and then look at the report. The refresh did complete. Yeah, it will reflect a 200. So I'm just checking. Yes, I think with that we have come to an end of the demo. So let's see, what else do we have? Yeah, I mean, that was pretty much the demo. Beyond that, I just had these resources to share wherein like these are the documentations that I followed to create this pipeline. There are two very good videos as well in terms of how this was done. And the videos are included here. And if you have any questions, community is the best place to go. I think that's all from my side. I can pause now and we can look through if there are any questions.
Oh, that was amazing. I can't wait to download these links and actually go through this. I kind of knew this was possible, but I haven't seen it done before, and I'm excited to try it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions they'd like to ask?
So it's good to see that you also have problems with the security and the permissions. I think we all are struggling with that in every step. So thank you.
Yeah.
I second that. I think I learned as much watching you think through how to solve those glitches as to watch the happy path. So thanks.
Yeah, that was the part I struggled the most with. Like even when I was preparing, like when I was first trying to do this, I spent like almost 2-3 days. I was to get frustrated, like what access am I? Because sometimes you would figure out that, okay, I've given access to the pipeline. Then you forget that, oh, I have to give access to the workspace as well. So it was like a very iterative process and understanding every error message. Okay, this time it's something else.
Yeah, I've also lived the struggle of understanding why different parts of Azure and Fabric use different names for service principal elements.
Yes.
They should standardize that. I think it would make it so much easier.
Yeah, I mean, that has happened within the organization also. Somebody says, create a service principal for me. And then like, okay, the Azure app is created. It's like, no, I don't want an Azure app. I want a service principal. It's like, okay, it's one and the same thing.
Yeah.
Akshata, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. So, in cases where, currently when we have a large data set, we restrict the data set in our Power BI desktop using a parameter, and then we
Mhm.
publish it and then change the parameter to enable a complete refresh of the data set. But so can we do the same over here using that parameter rules that you had shown?
Yes, so as if you're using the parameter which is in the Power Query editor side,
Mm-hmm.
yes, those parameters can be updated. So based on whatever value you want it to be in the QA and production, that value you can set it once in the deployment pipeline, and after that, every time you deploy the code, it will automatically take the value. It needs to be in QA environment. Unless you have like different values every time you deploy, then you do it manually. But if you have the same value, um, every time you refresh in QA, that should work.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, because I've tried those parameters with OneDrive Excel files and DB connections. I haven't found any issues with them.
Okay, sure. Sounds good. Thank you.
Hi, Akshita. Thank you.
Hi.
Just want to know that data set which are connected to multiple report files, right? So how we can do that, the integration part? So data set having multiple reports, multiple
Okay.
files for the report.
So let's say like I have one file from OneDrive and another data is coming from a database. Is
No,
that what you're
not like
referring to?
that.
Or it could be by multiple Excel files. So let's say instead of one Excel file, I have 3 Excel files as my data source.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, my question is like I have a one data set which is
Mhm.
like a common data set. So for
Okay.
that, I have like 4 different reports which are connected to the same data set. So
Okay.
how does it work in the integration part, like in the continuous integration? I want to maintain like,
Okay.
uh,
So, and let's say all your 4 reports are in the same workspace, or you're keeping them different workspace with a live connection.
it would be in the same workspace. Like one person will be working on the finance report, other person will be working on the payments part of the report. So that
Correct.
like that.
So even over here, let's say like, if in this workspace, if I go here using the same data set, if I create another report,
Mhm.
I can either, let's say you don't want to deploy the content. So when I created my pipeline over here, if you, let's see, let me select this pipeline. If you're doing it in an automated fashion, then
Mhm.
one thing that is over here, if you remember, like I said, artifacts to deploy, I selected all. You can make it selective and choose it accordingly if you're doing through Azure DevOps. If you're just using deployment pipelines,
Mhm.
you can come here and pick and choose what you want to deploy. So let's say the data set changed and your financial summary changed, but let's say sales report didn't change. Then you can choose not to push the sales report, right? Because you don't want to
Okay.
unnecessarily affect it. So you can either pick and choose over here, or instead of all, you can do a selective deployment and you can choose which reports, which dashboards are moving over here.
Okay. We have that option for selective deployments. Okay.
Yes, in both places. You can even in Azure DevOps pipelines or like these pipelines, you can do a selective deployment. And even over here, let's say you're not doing Azure DevOps, you're planning to use only deployment pipelines, then even here you have a selective deployment. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah. Let me try on that. I have not used this DevOps until now. So yeah, based
Okay,
on the real-time scenarios. Yeah. Thanks for the detailed session. Thanks.
sure.
Just catching up the comments. Harry had asked if you'd seen anyone trying to integrate Power BI with like GitHub Actions instead of Azure DevOps.
If I'm not wrong, I'm not sure if any new updates have come.
Yeah.
Power BI integrates like this Git integration over here, right? Let me go to a workspace
Yeah, you're
because
not sharing your screen, by the way.
oh, sorry. Yeah, let
That's
me
okay.
share it again. Oh my God, I spoke all this while without sharing my screen, and I thought I was
I think we
uh,
followed it. That's okay.
okay. Let me know when you see. Do you see my screen?
Yeah, there it comes. It's coming. Yep.
Okay. Okay, I forgot the question.
Yeah, I think the question is, can you more or less can you use GitHub instead of Azure DevOps?
Okay, yeah. So on that one, when I had last checked the workspace settings, right? Like when this Git integration, it's only for Azure DevOps.
Yeah, yeah. That's my
So
understanding of the current product on Fabric as well. I would be surprised if it wasn't eventually supported, but currently my understanding is only DevOps.
yes, that's right. So even when I first tried, I thought I was going to use GitHub, and then I realized that it works only with Azure DevOps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's
And on the
when you set it up, they have like a drop down with only one option, which
Yes.
is DevOps. So I think it's possibly a hint that more to come.
Yes, maybe.
Cross our fingers.
Okay. On the previous question, sorry, I assumed I was sharing my screen. So this is what I was referring to in terms of selective deployment. I can pick and choose in the deployment pipeline to do a selective deployment, or if I'm in the DevOps pipeline, there is an artifacts to deploy all or selective. And over here, I can specify what I am selecting. Sorry, I assumed I was sharing my screen and I kept doing this demo.
Yeah, we followed Archana. Thanks.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Any other questions?
So
I think
you
Harry also
deployed
asked.
to test. All this exercise was to deploy to test. But in many companies, we have different environments: test, pre-prod, and then production.
Over here, yeah, so let me show that. So in deployment pipeline, when I create a new pipeline, right, let me give it another name. When I say next, over here, so these are like previously when first deployment pipelines came in 2 years ago, it gave only 3 stages. And these names were also hard coded. Like I couldn't even call it QA, but that has now changed. I can add another stage. So let's say I call it as test and then QA, pre-prod, and prod, right? And let's say if you have another environment called stress.
Yeah.
So you can create as many layers you want. But then you will essentially need different workspaces because a workspace mapped to test cannot be mapped to stress. So if you have 5 environments, you'll need 5 workspaces.
Okay, thank you. I still had the idea that it was fixed.
Yeah, even like when I kept it suddenly pops up on you. I mean, all the Power BI features. Okay. Any other question?
I think Harry had asked the question if you could. His question is, can you tie a Power BI dashboard version to a source data version, meaning you version the source in OneLake at the same time as your Power BI visual?
I mean, I'm not able to fully visualize the question, but like if your data, so I don't know if you can keep 2 different versions of data sources unless it has different name, right? So it is considered as one data set, and I think the Power BI report would refer to it. So unless like it's in 2 different environments, like if you have a dev and QA different databases, it can switch the connection. I'm not sure if that's exactly the question, but I can't imagine a Power BI report having different. I mean,
Yeah.
unless like, if you mean the version control over here, yes, probably you can keep an older version of the data set and a newer version of report. Like let's say you don't have Power Query editor changes. I think that's what if you're thinking
and
about.
I think you kind of followed up with a good question that if, as you deployed your pipeline from dev to test, and then you kind of manually refresh the data, I think, if I remember the presentation. So as you like roll that dev into test, what happens to the data? Do you then have to, script a refresh, or how would you manage that in a production kind of environment?
So, I mean, if after your deployment, if there is already a scheduled refresh, it'll pick that up. And if not, then you have to manually run a refresh.
Got it.
For that workspace. The only thing like, over here, once you set up the connection, it will automatically pick up, like when you deploy the report, you have to do it just one time. the parameter rule over here that has to be set up. But once that is done, every time you push your content from development to test or dev to QA, it will pick up the connection. It will have the report point to that connection or the data set point to that connection. You run a refresh and then it'll pick it up.
That makes sense. And then for the users, when they refresh their browser or refresh their mobile app, then they would get the change as well.
They will get the change. I just noticed the question. I haven't seen a notification that says the report has changed. And again, I haven't used a report on a mobile app much, like if it normally tells that the report has refreshed. If it does normally, then probably it'll continue to do that.
I mean, I would assume it kind of would work the same as if you had deployed it from your desktop. Should be the same experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then it looks like Marcos had a question as well, or a couple questions.
Yes, I was just reading that. I haven't really tried with like huge objects. How do you deal with the issue of data volume in different events? Do you restrict deployments in any way that require reprocessing of adding columns, tables? I haven't tried, but my guess is, like I said, because it leaves the data behind and it just takes the skeleton structure, I think the deployment would still go fine, provided like, you're deploying one report or like, one data set, 3 reports, but if you're talking about deploying 20, 25 reports, I don't know what kind of time that will take. But my guess is that since it creates that PBI structure in a lightweight format, your deployment should still go pretty smooth, I would guess. That's something I'll probably take some time and test out and see what if I had 2 data sets or 2 semantic model and 10 reports from it. That's something I would have to test. But I'm guessing based on like, how the PBIP breaks it down, it would still be a lightweight version. And then I see a branching policies. Branching policies, I mean, still go with like, if right now I just used a main branch, that would be the first time deployment. But otherwise, if you follow agile sprint, like, if you follow an agile sprint, the methodology I have followed and which I like, every team does it different way and how they need it. Based on the story that you have, and if you have like a story ID, currently in my organization, we use Jira, right? So every Jira has an item ID. So let's say it's ABC-123. So we give a branch name. So every developer works with their own branch, and they create a feature branch, they make their changes, and then create a pull request. And then once the pull request is reviewed and approved by another team member or the team lead, it gets merged with the main branch. And then, or the main branch in the development, right? And then it gets deployed. Does that answer your question? I'm still reading Harry's question. I think that you might want a Power BI visual to only be used with data source at a point in time. I haven't tried the point in time. No, I haven't tried that. But the time travel is more of a, I think it works on the other data sets in the Fabric. I would think the synapse engineering. I haven't seen it specifically with semantic model or like the data set. I may be wrong, but I haven't seen the time travel feature with semantic model because again, that's a different version. Whereas the time travel that we are talking about on the Fabric, like, when in the notebook, you can do that. I think that would be a different feature. I haven't seen them work together. But then, yeah, I can make a note of it and look at that. Can you parameterize the name of the branch as part of the pipeline? I haven't tried that either. Let me see. Branch. I haven't seen that option to give a branch name. Which branch to pick it up? I think that is one of the first things we pick up, because even when I start the get sources, over here, this is the option. So I'm not sure. I don't think we can parameterize it unless, like, if there are APIs to run this as well. I mean, that is something would have to be researched. I mean, if there are APIs that can call Azure DevOps actions where you can pass the branch name and everything, probably it would be possible. Okay, let's see. Oh. Also, what happens to data imported into Power BI when it gets versioned? Into Power BI. Over here, the versioning is not really happening in your workspace. So the workspace only just looks for the previous difference. Let me, okay, in test 2. Let me go to the workspace. Your versioning is pretty much happening not pretty much, it's actually over here, there is no concept of versioning, right? Over here, it just gets overwritten. Only thing it does is it compares it. It was in the development. From what I've understood, looking at the way it works, it just compares to the previous version and senses that there's a difference and shows that over here that it is not synced. But your versioning is truly happening in the repository over here. So this is the place where the versioning is happening, and it has nothing to do in the Power BI workspace. Power BI workspace still continues to work as overwrite with the next version.
But I think in that git ignore file, you can ignore that data file, right? In the git ignore file, you can exclude that file, correct? That way it doesn't get versioned. Is that right?
But then if you're making, if you ignore it, it will never push it over here. So, and let's say if you're making Power Query editor changes, that will never get pushed. So I wouldn't recommend putting it in git ignore. I think the question is more around, does Power BI workspace save every version of the data set? I would say no, mainly because Power BI continues to work, or the workspace continues to work the way it was previously, right? It just keeps one version of that file. Your other versions are actually in the Azure DevOps repository. Does that make sense? Oh, sorry, I can't see. Harry, does that answer your question? Okay. Okay. Yeah. So Power BI workspace doesn't save any versions. It is just overwrites the file. All the versions are in the Azure repository. So if I go here on history, I can see all the versions over here, and I can see exactly which file was there. Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. Like, anyone would get confused. I'm not sure how many of you have used Tableau. Tableau in the just like Power BI service, there is Tableau online. And in Tableau, you can right click and actually look at the various versions and revert to a version in Tableau online browser itself. So, I mean, if the question is coming because you had used Tableau before, I can understand, like, yeah, in Tableau, you can actually right click and see the different versions. And that is a feature I always wondered, like, if Power BI had it. Otherwise, like, I have to maintain versions on my own, right? But Tableau allows me to do it in the browser itself. Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Marcos. Star schema is recommended even in Power BI as well. I mean, if you want the report to be efficient in long term, Power BI is recommended there as well. But yeah, even though it doesn't enforce this, but that is the recommended way to go. Like if you're building a Power BI report, do create a star schema because that makes your report more efficient. if you have SharePoint versioning setup possible. You can go to the previous version of the PBX file, even in your repository. In the Azure DevOps repository, you can always go to the previous version, because everything, this versioning works exactly like the way it would work for anything, like any other kind of code like Java or .NET that you work with. It is always possible to go to the previous version. Saving the whole point of having this is to avoid save the whole PBIX. I mean, that is the way we used to do previously, but if you want to avoid like keeping the whole PBIX file somewhere because it is more bulky, this is the way to go, and you can get the older versions from the Azure repository. Maybe, I mean, I don't know what Tableau uses underneath. I don't know much of Tableau. That is something I recently started learning, and like I keep looking at the features which is there in Tableau. It's possible it's probably using Git underneath. Okay. Anything else? Thank you.